Hello everyone, my name is Honza, and welcome to yet another episode of our journey through Norse mythology. Today we'll be talking about the lone sentry, the eternal guardian, the warden of the gods, Heimdall. Heimdall is, at least for me, one of the most fascinating gods in Norse mythology, as his character reflects the Norseman sense of honor. He stands ever vigil by Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, keeping an eye for any would-be intruders that would be so foolish as to try and attack the realm of the gods. In such cases, Heimdall stands not only as a watchman of the gods, but also as their first line of defense, and under his watch, none shall pass to Asgard. His duty is eternal, and not until the final battle at Ragnarok will Heimdall abandon his post, perhaps only when some stories demand his presence elsewhere. Heimdall's infinite patience is something utterly unthinkable for characters such as Thor, who is rash, hot-headed, and always anxious for the next fight. This perseverance and endurance makes him stand out from most of the other gods, who showcase their very human restlessness and hastiness in their actions. This makes Heimdall the perfect candidate for the Warden of Asgard. Let's now look into Snorri's Prose Edda and read his quite broad description of Heimdall. After I finish, we'll look at each of his points separately. Quote, Heimdall is the name of one. He is also called the White God. He is great and holy, born of 9 maidens, all of whom were sisters. He is also called Halinskiad and Gulintein, for his teeth were of gold. His horse is called Gultop. He dwells in a place called Himinbjorg near Bifrost. He is the ward of the gods, and sits at the end of heaven, guarding the bridge against the mountain giants. He needs less sleep than a bird, sees 100 miles around him, and as well by night as by day. He hears the grass grow and the wool on the backs of sheep, and of course, all things that sound louder than these. He has a trumpet called Gjallarhorn, and when he blows it, it can be heard in all the worlds. Heimdall's sword is called Het. End quote. Very well then, let's see what we've learned. The color white was, and in some cases still is, a color resembling virtue and purity, and so the title of White God might have been given to Heimdall as a recognition of his honor and just morality. He's truthful, fair, and forever abides his duty, making him the paragon of good virtue. This is further confirmed in the next sentence where Snorri describes him as being, quote, great and holy. Even though this is the most widely believed interpretation of this title, it is never clearly confirmed in the sources, and it might be referring to some other attribute of Heimdall's that today is lost to us. Some scholars think Heimdall may have been a god of light, or in some way associated with the sky. However, there is no clear evidence to confirm nor deny that notion. Very much in the impossible spirit of Norse myths, that had brought us Ymir's legs having sex with each other to give birth to the first giants, we also learned that Heimdall is the son of no less than 9 mothers. How that came about, I will leave to your imagination. Let's find out a bit more about this story by reading a few stanzas from Voluspa in Skjama, an Old Norse poem meaning short Voluspa. Quote, there was one born in ancient times, a very powerful son of the family of gods. He had 9 mothers. Those 9 giant women gave birth to the noble spearmen at the edge of the world. End quote. This stanza tells us of the parentage of Heimdall, that being a son of a god and 9 giant women. Who is Heimdall's father is never stated in the myths. Snorri calls Heimdall the White Assa, Assa being the singular form of Aesir, and in his Prose Edda he also distinctly lists Heimdall as being one of the Aesir when he talks of them. Aesir of course being Odin and his family. It is widely presumed that Heimdall's father might be Odin, however, as I said, there is no clear evidence in the sources to confirm that. Furthermore, a part of a stanza in another poem, Thrimskvitha, tells us that he might belong to another family of gods altogether. Quote, then Heimdall spoke, the handsomest of gods, as one of the Vanir he could see the future. End quote. The meaning of this stanza is still uncertain, as this could either mean that Heimdall belongs to the Vanir tribe of gods, or simply that, like them, he has the ability to see the future. We do not have any further evidence to prove or disprove either, and so to which family Heimdall belongs remains uncertain. The implications of this passage shouldn't be taken literally, as given the context of this stanza, it only seems to imply Heimdall is wise and keen to give good advice, which he gives in the rest of this very stanza. His mothers are quite the enigma of their own. Let's read their names first. Quote, "His mothers were Gjalp and Grape, Aesla and Ergjafa, Ulfrun and Angreya, Imth and Atla and Jarnsaxa." End quote. Heimdall's mothers, these 9 giantesses, are figures of unknown origin and significance. Some scholars think Heimdall's 9 mothers might be linked to the sea giant Aegir, who has precisely 9 daughters. However, not one name of his daughters matches the ones of Heimdall's mothers. It is of course quite common for creatures and characters in Norse mythology to bear different names, but without any further evidence to support this theory, we can only see it as mere speculation, based on what might be just a coincidence. After the stanza about Heimdall's mothers, an account of his birth or childhood follows. Quote, "The earth gave him strength to grow, as did the cold sea, and the blood of the bull." End quote. There is not much we can say about this stanza. It seems that on top of Heimdall gaining strength from both the earth and sea, he also gained one from blood sacrifice. However, without any further information, we can't really elaborate why he was granted either. Looking further into Snorri's account of Heimdall, he mentions he is also known under different names. The ones he lists are Halinskjat and Gullintein, and while we have no idea as to the meaning of the first, the second goes hand in hand with the following sentence given to us by Snorri, which is that Heimdall has teeth of gold. The name Gullintein literally means golden teethed, or the one with the golden teeth. Heimdall's horse is named Gulltopp, who is perhaps stabled in Heimdall's hall called Himinbjörg, which lies near Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connects Asgard to Midgard. At the end of that bridge, Heimdall stands guard, day and night, for he needs less sleep than a bird, and anyone who would even think of assaulting the home of the gods can forget the element of surprise, for Heimdall sees up to 100 miles far away and as easy at night as by day. Furthermore, Heimdall's hearing is so keen he can hear the grass grow on Midgard, and even wool grow on sheep. By his side hangs the great horn named Gjallarhorn, which he will blow at Ragnarok to warn the gods that their enemies ride to meet them in the final battle. He will blow the horn so hard that its sound will echo through all the 9 worlds. As I said in my video examining the Voluspa poem, there are some possible speculations to be made about the relation of Heimdall's horn, Gjallarhorn, to the drinking horn of the same name that belongs to Mimir, the guardian of the Well of Wisdom, and all because of this stanza. Quote, "I know where Heimdall hid his ear, under the heaven-bright holy branches of Yggdrasil. I see a river that feeds the muddy waterfall where Odin's eye hides. Have you learned enough yet, Allfather?" End quote. In the original Old Norse, the first 2 lines tell us this: "I know where Heimdall hid his hljoth." However, hljoth can mean a variety of things depending on the context, and even though we have some context here that helps us eliminate some options, the translations can still vary. You see, the best we can do is to narrow the translation to 2 possible words given the context: hearing or sound. Now, this doesn't mean that the translation will be literal, but rather a metaphor for something. In Dr. Crawford's translation that I'm using, he went with the hearing translation for the word hljoth, and he used it as a metaphor for ear. When we look at the rest of the stanza, this could definitely work, as the stanza compares Heimdall's sacrifice of his ear to Odin's sacrifice of his eye to the Well of Mimir. But while Odin may have sacrificed one of his eyes to receive a greater insight, Heimdall may have sacrificed his ear to receive superior hearing, to help him in his ever-vigilant duty as the sentry of the gods. We've read just a few moments ago of Heimdall's amazing hearing capabilities, and so this interpretation might fit. However, the other translation of hljoth, that being sound, could also refer to Heimdall's horn, the Gjallarhorn, which bears the same name as the horn from which Mimir drinks the water of the Well of Wisdom. It is very strange for Norse mythology to have 2 such very similar objects bear the same name, as many characters have no shortage of different names on their own. And so, who knows, perhaps the wise Mimir was aware of the prophecy that Heimdall would play in the Ragnarok, and he gave him his horn for that very reason. Perhaps, perhaps not. There is no way we can find out today, and so we are left with only speculations. Perhaps this is just one big coincidence. One last thing Snorri tells us about Heimdall is that the name of his sword, Hofud, means head. One last thing we'll mention about Heimdall before we delve into a story about him is that he is quite the adversary of Loki. Perhaps he could be even considered a nemesis. Heimdall's virtues of selflessness, honor and duty often collide with Loki's selfishness and desire for mischief and discord. These two characters are such moral opposites that they find themselves at odds within the myths on more than one occasion. Their conflict of interest, to put it mildly, leads them into a duel at the final battle at Ragnarok, where, quote, Loki fights with Heimdall and they kill each other, end quote. We have a long way to go until that fateful day, however, and we will explore the development of their rivalry as we make our way through the myths. For now, let's explore the poem Riksfura, which tells the story of how Heimdall fathered the social classes of humankind. Now, before we get into the story itself, there is one important thing we need to discuss first. The poem itself does not mention Heimdall in any way, instead it mentions a god under the name of Rig. Now, we know that Norse gods often took on different names, however, within the stanzas of this poem, there is never mentioned who exactly this god is. The only thing in this poem that tells us that the god is Heimdall is a prose introduction from an annotator who catalogued this poem in the 14th or late 13th century, several centuries after it was presumably composed. At the time the annotator wrote this prose introduction, the Norse faith was all but gone and the myths were seen as but an interesting piece of folklore. Perhaps this annotator knew of some other myths or lore that is today lost to us and that confirms his identification of Heimdall as being the god Rig in this poem. However, his prose introduction of this poem seems to suggest he probably knew little about the myths and traditions and most likely listed Heimdall as being Rig by mistake. For his prose introduction to the poem says this, quote, Many say in the old sagas that one of the Aesir, the god Heimdall, went on a journey along a certain seashore, and soon he came to a farm where he gave his name as Rig. This poem is about that story. End quote. From the first few words of this introduction, we can already see the vagueness of the annotator's statement. Many say in the old sagas, it's quite a general term, much like legends tell or the old tales say. The fact that this is not supported by any citations or examples of which old sagas does the annotator mean only makes it seem as ambiguous statement at best. Now, you may wonder what makes us doubt this story is about Heimdall and not some other god. Well, there are a few things. Firstly, the very obvious one. Why would Heimdall, the century of the gods, be the one to father the classes of men? Wouldn't this role fit Odin much better than him? Well, of course, but that is mere logical conclusion, and we are looking for some specific pointers. Well, we need to look no further than into the actual poem itself. Right from the bat, the first stanza says, quote, It is said that a wise god, Rig, powerful and aged, fierce and strong, walked upon green roads. End quote. A god, wise, powerful and aged. Now, who does the description remind you of? Yes, if somebody asked you to use 3 words to describe Odin, old, powerful and wise would most likely be the words you'd use. What more, it is mentioned in later stanzas of this poem that Rig teaches a mortal man runes and how to use them, which is definitely something that would fit Odin rather than Heimdall. Furthermore, the name Rig means king, yet another name fitting Odin, as he is the ruler of the Aesir. But what is perhaps the most compelling evidence that the god Rig is Odin lies within the actual purpose of this poem. The whole poem serves as a means to explain how society came to be, which is, through the god Rig, forming the future 3 classes of people that will build an early society. Rig does this by sleeping with the female ancestors of these 3 future classes, effectively making sure they come to be. These three classes are thralls, the slaves, and later the peasants, that work the fields, do manual labor, and form the necessary backbone of any society. Then there are the commoners, the men who focus on individual crafts, own estates and property, and make the luxury products for the society to consume. And the last is nobility, the one who actually rules, governs, and directs the society to keep it from falling. And it is from among this last class that the first king arose, as the poem states. Now, the poem is incomplete and there are several stanzas missing, but what we can assume from both the structure of the poem and its praise of the nobility is that this could have very well been a poem composed in honor of some king, and the purpose of the poem was to link the said king with the very first king of which this poem talks about. This would glorify the king by exalting his line and, more importantly, linking him as a direct descendant of a god. Now, it is quite common in Norse sagas for heroes to associate themselves as sons or descendants of Odin, and it is very unlikely that this poem is any exception to that rule. Odin is, after all, the king of kings, and so it would make sense this poem was composed with the purpose of linking the king who it was composed for as a direct descendant of Odin. After hearing all this, you may wonder, why is there any debate about if or if not this poem is actually about Heimdall? Well, it is not that simple after all. The very first stanza of Völuspá, the witch's prophecy, starts like this, quote, "Heed my words, all classes of men, you greater and lesser children of Heimdall." End quote. This, albeit vague and simple introduction, seems to suggest that Heimdall's formation of the social classes was a known concept to, at the very least, the author of this particular poem. Though how well known and acknowledged concept it was overall in the Norse society is something we cannot know today. The Völuspá poem lived through oral tradition before it was committed to writing, and so some alterations or additions throughout its lifetime were definitely possible, and so who knows if this opening isn't some confused addition created through its many retellings, or perhaps a later error or an interpolation from those who had written it down. There are, after all, some stanzas that are presumed to be interpolations, and so it wouldn't be something unheard of. In the end, there is no decisive evidence to confirm that the god within the poem about the god Rig is Heimdall or Odin, and even though the context and backstory to the creation of the poem suggests the latter, we cannot claim that with certainty. I'll make a separate video examining the poem and its stanzas in detail, but today I will end this video with my own interpretation of the story, with some changes and additions based around the actual poem itself. Just like in my video about the prophecy of Ragnarok, I will not announce when I'm about to be citing a particular source, just to give the story a smooth flow. The stanzas from the poem will, however, be on the screen as always. If you would like to know more about this poem, or if you will be curious to find out about the meaning of some of its stanzas, I recommend you watch the video of me examining the poem in detail, which I will release in short order after this one. With all that out of the way, let's hear about how Heimdall fathered the social classes. Many say in the old sagas that one of the Aesir, the god named Heimdall, went on a journey along a certain seashore, and soon he came to a farm where he gave his name as Rig. His poem is about that story. It is said that a wise god, Rig, powerful and aged, fierce and strong, walked upon green roads. He has walked them for some time now, the noble Heimdall in the skies, and saw that the race of men did not yet know what their place was in the world, and so he decided to guide them and show them what each was required to do for the benefit of them all. In the middle of the road he came walking. He came to a house, the door was open. He went in, a fire burned on the floor, and a grey-haired couple sat before it, named A and Edda. They were an aged pair. Rig knew how to give them good counsel. He sat down between them, with man and the woman on either side of him. He told them of his travels, and what he saw in the world, and of the wisdoms he learned. He gave them good advice of how to raise their child if they were ever blessed with one, and how to guide it so it could make best of its life. He told them that tough and honest work is needed in the world, and that their child would benefit greatly from it. Then Edda took a swollen loaf of bread, heavy and thick, stuffed with grains, and she put that and more in the middle of the table. There was soup in a bowl, and a boiled calf meat was set on the table. That was the best of their delicacies. After the meal was done, Rig rose from his seat and was ready for sleep. He knew how to give them good counsel. He lay down in bed between them, with the man and the woman on either side of him. He was there 3 nights in a row, then he went walking in the middle of the road, and 9 months soon passed. Edda had a child. They splashed him with water, wrapped him in dark blankets, and named him Slave. They guided him with the advices Gudrid gave them, and thanks to them, Slave grew up and did well for himself. His hands had scabby skin, knobby knuckles, and fat fingers. His face was ugly, he had a bad back, and long pair of heels on his feet. Then a woman came wandering his way, with scars on her feet and sunburnt arms. She had a hook nose, and her name was Slave Woman. She sat down in the middle of the floor, and Slave sat down next to her. They spoke and they whispered. Slave and Slave Woman, they readied the bed after a hard day's work. They had children, they taught them and loved them. I think their sons were named Lumpy and Barn Cleaner, Noisy and Horsefly, Sleeper, Stinker, Midget, Fat Boy, Slow and Grey Hair, Hunchback and Dangleleg. They made fences, they made fields, they raised pigs, they herded goats, they shoveled manure. Their daughters were Shorty and Fatty, Fat Calf and Beak Nose, Shriek and Slave Girl, Gossip, Skinny Hips and Birdie Legs. All the families of slaves are descended from them. Meanwhile, Rig went on upon his way. He came to a hall, the door was open. He went inside. A fire burned on the floor. A couple sat there, busy with their work. The man was busy with wood carving. His beard was trimmed, his hair lay in locks on his forehead. His shirt was tailored, he owned a chest of drawers. His wife sat and spun her spinning wheel. With her arms she was weaving. She had a headdress, she wore a blouse, she had a lace choker and a jewelled brooches. Afi and Amma were their names. Rick knew how to give them good counsel. He sat down between them, with the man and the woman on either side of him, and he told them of his travels and what he saw in the world, and of the wisdoms he learned. He gave them good advice of how to raise their child if they ever were blessed with one, and how to guide it so it could make best of its life. He told them that the good craftsmen and farmers were always appreciated in the world, and that their child would benefit greatly from picking up a craft and running his own homestead. Then Amma took a crisp loaf of bread and served it in the middle of the table. There also was a piece of ham and goat cheese. They washed down their meal with ale and talked until sun went down. Rick knew how to give them good counsel. He rose from the table, ready to sleep. He lay down in bed between them, with the man and the woman on either side of him. He was there 3 nights in a row, and 9 months soon passed. Emma had a child. They splashed him with water and named him Freeman. His mother wrapped her red-haired ruddy child in cloth. His eyes were keen. He grew up and did well for himself. He tamed oxen, he made a plough. He built houses and he built barns. He made wagons and drove a plough. Then they brought him a housewife with her keys in a goat skin clothes. They married her to Freeman. She was named In-law. She wore the bridal veil. That couple lived together. They exchanged rings. They shared their sheets. They made a home. They had children. They taught them and loved them. Their sons were manful and fighter, brave, swordsman and smith, stout, farmer, trimbeard, rancher and husband, sharpbeard and manly. And they had daughters with these names: smart, bride, swan, lady, dame, girl, noblewoman, wife, shy and vivacious. All the families of free farmers are descended from them. Meanwhile, Rig went on upon his way. He came to a hall with the door facing south. and standing open. There was a ring for knocking on the door. He went in and found the floor covered with straw. A husband and wife sat there and looked into one another's eyes. They were named Father and Mother. They held one another's hand. The husband sat and strung his bow. He bent its shaft and made arrows for it. His wife inspected the sleeves of her blouse, stroked the wrinkles out, smoothed them out. She adjusted her headdress. She had a jewel on her chest, and a long dress, and a blue-colored blouse. Her face was more beautiful. Her breast was more beautiful. Her neck was more beautiful than pure snow. Rig knew how to give them good counsel. He sat down between them, with the man and the woman on either side of him. He told them of his travels and what he saw in the world, and of the wisdoms he learned. He gave them good advice of how to raise their child if they were ever blessed with one, and how to guide it so it could make best of its life. He told them that a proper leader was always needed in the world, a man to inspire, rule and protect, and that their child would benefit greatly from learning all these things. Then Mother brought out a fine white ornamental cloth and covered the table. She brought out thin sliced bread made of white wheat and filled the table. She set out full plates and treasures of silverware on the table, loaded with meat and poultry. They drank wine from gemstone beakers. They drank and talked till the day turned into night. Rig knew how to give them good counsel. He rose from his seat and prepared the bed. He was there 3 nights in a row. Then he went walking again in the middle of the road, and 9 months soon passed. Mother had a child. She swaddled him in silk. They sprinkled water over him. They named him Lord. His hair was blonde. His cheeks were bright. His eyes were as cruel and clear as vipers. They raised Lord there in their home. He learned to hold a shield, to string a bow, to bend a bow, to carve an arrow, to throw a spear, to cast a javelin, to ride a horse, to hunt with dogs, to draw a sword, to swim competitively. They taught him how to lead and command, and how to govern others. Heimdall watched the rise of human society and thought that the race of men would now be able to thrive and prosper, and with that thought, he left the men of Midgard to take their fates into their own hands, free of his guidance. What he did not know was that another god watched his doing throughout all these years with a look of opportunity. With Heimdall's teachings, Lord's family prospered greatly, and their estate grew large in size. Then Rig came walking to their farm, yet this time he seemed older than when they last saw him, and he was missing an eye. Rig took a particular interest in the young son of the couple. He taught Lord runes, gave him his own name, called him his son, told him to claim lands, to conquer old villages. Under the one-eyed Rig's guidance, Lord grew lustful of battle. He rode then through the icy mountains of Mirkwood, till he came to a hall, and shook his spear, shook his shield, set his horse to a gallop, and drew his sword. He started a war. He reddened the fields with blood. He killed many men. He conquered many lands. He became sole owner of 18 estates. He shared his wealth. He gave his men treasures upon treasures, and good horses. He gave away rings. He did not care to hoard them. Then messengers came along well-prepared roads. They came to the hall where that chieftain lived. They presented the beautiful, soft-fingered wise girl, whose name was Eagle. They offered Lord the girl, took her to his home, married her to him. She wore the bridal veil. Then they lived together and loved one another. They increased their family and enjoyed their days. Their oldest son was boy, and the next was kid. Then offspring and noble, heir and scion, descendant and successor, son and lad, another nobility, and the youngest was named king. They played together. They learned to swim, to play chess. The sons of Lord grew up there. They broke horses, they made shields, they shot arrows, they made war. Lord raised his sons in the way one-eyed Rig taught him, the way of a warrior. All of his sons became great commanders and fighters. But the young king learned runes, runes of fate and runes of destiny. He learned spells to save lives and dull blades to calm storms. He mastered the runes better than his father Lord ever could, and soon he surpassed his father in the runic teachings One-Eyed Rig gave him. He learned the language of birds, he learned to put out fires, to calm sorrows and induce sleep, and give comfort in sorrow. He had the strength, the passion of 8 men. And when King inherited his own estate and became a man of power and renown, the One-Eyed Rig returned, offering his guidance to King as he once did to his father. Rig shared runes with him, but King tricked him. He learned them better than he, and then he earned the right to call himself by the name of Rig for his rune lore.
Your counsel is no longer needed, old man. I mastered your runecraft better than you. Now I can call myself Rig, and you are but a fool.
The One-Eyed Rig then left the side of the young king, and for years King's estate prospered and grew thanks to its wise ruler. Then one day, young King rode with his arrows. He shot arrows, he killed birds. Then a crow said to him, a crow sitting on a high branch,
"Why do you kill birds, young king? It would be better to mount upon your horse and kill men. I know 2 chieftains with rich horse. They live nearby. They have bigger inheritances than you. They know how to steer ships. They know how to sharpen blades. They know how to kill men."
My own inheritance is rich, and neither of my neighbors have done ill to me nor my people. So why do you speak these words? What is there to gain from attacking them?
Did your father not teach you of the glory of battle? Our father looks joyfully at those who live their lives by the sword. Those who fall in the glory of battle have the chance to join him in death in his grand hall as honored guests forever. The victorious may rise to the glory of the gods. The names of the powerful will echo through eternity. Cattle die and kinsmen die. Even you'll one day perish. But I tell you of a thing that does not die. The fame of dead men's deeds. Ride forth and make your name known from the mountains to the sea. Make your friends rejoice and your enemies tremble at the sound of your name.
The young king long thought of what the crow told him, yet day by day, his own riches and power seemed less and less impressive to him. And so one day he marched to wage war against his neighbors. In years to come, many would come to know the name King, and his fame and glory was passed down through generations. King's descendants would follow their father's example, and each would conquer and carve lands for themselves. Yet when their sons would come to rule, there would no longer be enough land for everyone, nor food or riches aplenty. And so the descendants of King would wage war against each other, competing for their place in the world. Heimdall watched this transpire, disappointed in the race of men, where his teachings would lead them to this fate. Be it as it may, while he was walking through the roads of Midgard, he was met with a stranger, draped in a grey cloak.
"Noble Heimdall," spoke the figure, "a dark prophecy heralds grim fate for both gods and men. Your kinsmen are threatened, so I call upon your honor to come and defend the realm of the gods."
And thus Heimdall took up his duty as the warden and sentry of Asgard, standing watch till the final battle. Yet he was not the only one who Odin brought with him back to Asgard. The one-eyed god brought many of the sons he conceived on his travels, like Thor of the Thunders, his son by the giantess Jord, and Vidar, the silent god, he conceived of the giantess Gridra. But more importantly, he brought with him a giant who he met on his travels, a giant with whom he made a blood oath of brotherhood. But this would be all for today, and I bid you all farewell, until next time.